Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this next T3 session on LoopBack. So from the development team, we have Richie Martori on the phone. So he will be taking us through some charts, and we'll handle this like the other ones. If you have any questions, just put them in chat. We'll corral those, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. Richie, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So we're going to go over LoopBack, and I'll try and stitch together how LoopBack fits into API Connect. But the focus of this little session is an overview of LoopBack and a highlight of each of the different large components of LoopBack, so that given that we only have 45 minutes, that's really not enough time to explain every nuance of LoopBack. But after this presentation, you should be able to go and have an understanding of like all the different terms and more than a basic understanding of LoopBack. So here's what I want to cover. First, we'll go over a basic use case for LoopBack, so that even if you might already be familiar with this, it's good just to set some context. So we're talking about the same things, and it's clear why people use LoopBack. And in some of the other things I'll go over, I'll use some of these examples. So we're going to talk about things like how do you use LoopBack to connect to data, what that means, how LoopBack exposes its internals and that data that you've connected to the outside world using remote methods. Like how does LoopBack define APIs? How does it create these APIs? How do you model data in LoopBack? And things like, beyond just defining the structure of your data, how do you validate input? What are things like strict mode, and how do you migrate data? I'll also show you how to define relationships. So in LoopBack, this is a feature that allows you to quickly take a bunch of disparate data and combine it into a new RESTful API that's easily consumable. And then I'll touch on the authentication systems and security that's built into LoopBack, so access controls. Like how do you define roles? What are the built-in roles? Access control lists. And then I'll briefly touch on these last three things. Client SDKs, which I'll explain a little bit more in the next slide or two. And then I want to touch a little bit on how do you test LoopBack applications and how do you debug them. And also, as we're working together internally at IBM, if we find bugs or if we want to improve things, what sort of processes can we follow to make sure those things are made aware to the teams working on LoopBack? So what do developers use LoopBack for? And this should be fairly obvious, APIs. But when people say that, what do they actually mean by that? So here's a very simple, straightforward example. So on the left, we have the Uber iOS application. So that's the application installed on your phone. This could be an IoT, this could be several different types of application, but for this example, we're using an iOS application. So that's on the left. So whatever the application is, it's going to consume these services. So these are some example services on the right. And some people refer to these as system APIs. And so what mechanism, the app needs some mechanism to be able to consume these APIs. It can't consume them directly. And so that's where LoopBack fits in. LoopBack works as an intermediary between these data-driven applications and these internal system services. And it does quite a few things I'll walk through in the rest of the presentation. So let's define some of the terms that I'm going to be using, like what is the anatomy of a loopback application? So there's two main things that you need to understand when talking about loopback. It's models and data sources. And so models, this diagram represents that models can be attached to data sources, but each model can only have a single data source. So what is a model? This is an example of an actual model definition, is what we call it in loopback. So it specifies the model name, but as a user of loopback, what you're trying to do by creating a model is tell loopback about the structure of the data. And then some of these other things I'll get into in a little bit, validations, relations, access controls, and methods. But the important thing to understand about a model is it's the structure of your data, and it also includes the remote methods or JavaScript methods for interacting with your data. And I'll show you in a couple of examples. So a data source is pretty much the information that loopback needs to connect to a given source of data. So in this example, we're telling loopback to create a data source that connects to a Mongo database. And there's many different types of connectors, which I'll go through. But essentially, this is all the different connection information for the database or for the REST API. So each of these boxes on the right represent the different categories of connector. So on the previous slide, I mentioned the connector was MongoDB. So loopback has a set of plugins developed by the loopback team and also the community called connectors. And each connector implements the interface of a specific type of data source, a specific data source. So an example would be MongoDB, MySQL, DB2, different databases. But data sources go beyond databases. We also support and have several connectors that allow you to connect to REST APIs or SOAP APIs. And so most of these, here's a list of some of the connectors we support. It's actually longer than this. So most of these connectors implement what's called the persisted model interface. This is a subset of the interface, but if we look through these, well, hold on, let me take a step back. So the persisted model here on the left, this is a JavaScript class defined by the loopback framework. And what it defines is an abstract class or an interface. For example, all of these methods, like for example, count, which takes a filter. So when you call the count method, it returns the number of records that match the filter that you provide. But the point here is that we have this interface called persisted model, and then each of these connectors, like the MongoDB connector, the MySQL connector, they implement this interface for the given data source. So the second point here is that what loopback does is for each of these data source specific implementations, like the create method for MongoDB, it takes that method and it attaches it to your model. So when you define a model in loopback and you attach it to a data source, what happens is it defines a new method on your model. And these methods are called remote methods. So here's So there's two ways that you'll have a remote method added to your model. You can add them yourself in JavaScript like we have here. So in this example, there's no connector, there's no data source. This is just a vanilla model that we're manually adding a method to, and then so that's this third line here. We're setting a new function. We're manually defining a remote method. And then below here, where we say myModel.remote method, this is where we're telling LoopBack about the to this method, the input and the output. So in this example, we're manually defining a remote method, which takes an argument called message, MSG, and it returns an argument called result. And so when you call this method, it just returns the data that you gave it. That's why it's called echo. So you can call this method in JavaScript, or you can call this method in the attached adapter. So in this case, and by default, LoopBack exports these methods. It exposes them over the REST adapter, which is what allows you to turn your JavaScript methods into REST APIs. So in this example, you see on the right side of the screen, method name. That's the method name we defined in the second block of code. And the message is the argument. So for the remote method, this is an example of us executing that remote method by making an HTTP request with curl. And you see the result is this JSON body with a single property of message here on the left. So this is the mechanism that LoopBack uses to take the JavaScript methods defined by a connector and turn those into REST APIs with a little bit of mapping metadata. That's what was on the previous screen. So in LoopBack, like I was saying before, models allow you to describe the structure of your data. So in this example, we have an order model with two properties, date and description. And by default, LoopBack is in a automatic mode, which allows you to create data that has no structure. So it's sort of a hard concept to define, but imagine if this model is attached to a Mongo data source. The Mongo data source can accept any data, any JSON object structure. So we don't have to tell the Mongo data source about the structure ahead of time. We still might want to define the properties in order to document them, or in order to validate them. So in summary, the properties section is actually optional unless we specify a strict mode. And so strict mode is required for connectors like MySQL and other SQL connectors. And so these, the reason it's required is that these connectors use this metadata to define, uses them for the data definition commands which allow you to migrate, for example, this order model into the actual database. So if we specify these two properties and we use LoopBack's migration API, we can automatically create a order table in our MySQL database or other SQL database that's attached to this model. So once you have the structure of your data, you might need to, and usually you'll need to validate the input. So when someone uses the API, the persisted model API, to insert a new order, or in this case, to create a new user record, you might want to ensure certain conditions are met. And so we support two different flavors of this. The example here is a declarative flavor, which allows you to, for simple validations, like in the case of the second line, the length of a string. So for simple cases, we allow you to just declare, using the syntax illustrated here, specific rules that must be that must pass before a record is considered valid and will be inserted or updated in a connector, or in a data source rather. We also support a custom flavor, which is if you can't specify, or let's say you have a more complex validation logic, you can specify it as a JavaScript function, and when, for example, the question model is inserted, this custom validator will run. So once you've defined the structure of the data within your LoopBack application, most applications have some form of relationships. So let's see, an existing so let's say we have an application that has coffee shops and reviews for each of those coffee shops. In LoopBack, you would define a relationship between those two models, and you'll see in a couple slides how that works. So in that example, a coffee shop has many reviews. A has many is what we call a relationship type, and so we support several different relationship types. And depending on the relationship type, LoopBack defines a different JavaScript method on your model. So in the here's the example I was just saying. You have a coffee shop model and a review model. You set the relationship type as has many. You choose the model to create the relationship with. And we allow you to do a couple other things, like define the foreign key. This is just the serialization of the relationship in the model JSON file. So I was showing you in the previous example, I was showing you the order JSON file. This is the same file, but for the coffee shop model, and the relation section is filled in. So once we've defined a relation, depending on which relation we define, we get a new method. So in this case, on the coffee shop, we get a new review method, reviews method, which will return the related reviews for the coffee coffee shop we call the method on. And the same thing is true for the REST API. So there are several ways to call a relation in the REST API. This way allows you to include the embedded relation within the outer query. So this example is querying coffee shops with this filter up here at the top. So this filter could include something that would limit the number of results, like a where clause. So where coffee shops are in zip code, a given zip code, which will limit the results. But then we can also specify an include, which will call within the reviews, within the coffee shops, it will call that review function and return the reviews as a nested property of the review. So you can also invoke these relation APIs as regular remote methods. So that would be, instead of this filter, you would specify the ID. So it would be coffee shops /ID/reviews. And you would get the reviews as an array. Okay, so LoopBack has a built-in token management and user management and authentication system or systems.
So Richard, can I ask you a question? So
Sure.
Does LoopBack still support this? I mean, because I know previously it did, but I think within the context of API Connect, is authorization still part of that, or has that been moved over to the micro gateway? I just want to make sure that from a contextual perspective that because the folks here will be, they'll be actually using the API Connect components to, to build models and data sources and everything here. But I think this security piece here, I think, is handled a little differently. If I'm not correct, folks on the phone, let me know. I just want to make sure that we're talking about stuff here that's germane to API Connect.
Yeah, it's a complicated question, but I think it's worth discussing the nuance of. Okay, so for example, let me pull up a API Connect diagram. It's actually a really good question. Sorry, hold on one second. So some of these are out of date, but the diagram is no. Okay, so let me see if I can play this. Okay, this is actually really important. So in the introduction, I was saying I wanted to explain some of the ways that LoopBack stitches within API Connect, and so this is where it really starts to. Up until now, I've explained all the internal things that, whether using LoopBack on its own or with API Connect or as part of API Connect, it's really the same. Once you start working with authentication and security, it gets a little blurry. But there's a couple of suggested ways a couple of recommended architectures for how you use LoopBack and API Connect together and how you use API Connect as an entire platform. And so this diagram is important to understand. So basically what this on the left represents is the request response path. And on the right is your, in this case, your LoopBack API. So in API Connect, so this API proxy can be either the API gateway, the micro gateway, or the edge gateway, data power gateway. But they follow the same basic process as they're handling an HTTP request. So let me build up this full diagram. Okay, so this section here, assembly, is where you define your different gateway policies. And so that could be, mediation or security, basic gateway functionality that you'd expect out of something that sits in front of your API. And so that has overlap with what LoopBack provides out of the box, but you can still use those things together. So, and it really depends on what the logic is of the authentication. So for example, if you want to specify the security constraint within your proxy or your gateway, a basic authentication security restraint, that's something that fits perfectly well, and we'd recommend doing that in your gateway. But if you're trying to enforce some business-based security, like for example, you need to do a query and determine, who is the owner of this object, or does the owner of this object belong to this group? Those sorts of things you should do within LoopBack. So that's where the line gets a little blurry. So the defining the business-based security constraints is still relevant, Mike. So I'm going to jump back to this.
No, that's good. Thank you. The comments in the chat where this is this slide adds a nice perspective. Thank you for doing that.
Okay. All right, let me jump back. So any other questions while we're taking a little pause?
I think there were some questions about auto discovery and things like that. I think those are mostly answered. We'll maybe just take a minute or two for questions. So any questions on the phone so far from what has been presented? Star 1 to unmute. Okay, nothing. Go ahead and carry on.
Auto discovery, yeah, that's an interesting question. So technically in LoopBack and in Strong Loop Arc, we support the ability to discover models based on the schema of a database, for example. And so that's something that we're trying to add to API Connect and the API Designer, but it's not a feature as of right now. All the different APIs still exist within LoopBack, which allow you to write your own scripts that do things like discovery. So the functionality is still available if you're through scripting, through node-based scripting. I mean, we're working on adding it to both the command line and the actual designer interface. So hopefully that answers that question. So I wanted to touch a little bit on, go ahead.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. So what I was saying before about when you have authentication that you can't really do in the gateway, LoopBack provides facilities for some of that as well. And so that means you can use your existing identity management and token management. You have to implement a couple of hooks, which I'm not going to go over in this presentation because we don't have time. You can implement hooks that allow you to use the actual back end of your existing identity management, but use the declarative syntax and access control engine that's or system that's built into LoopBack. So let me go through some of those briefly. So what we're showing here is the different models within the different JavaScript classes is what they actually are within the LoopBack authentication system. And so the important ones are role and ACL. Principal is just a way of identifying who the actual consumer is, who the person or the access token is representing. So the basic flow of authentication is you specify an access token, it uses that to resolve all of this information for a given request. And that access token can be really represented in many different ways. There's a built-in token management system that you can use, but you can replace the way that works with your own token management system, like I was saying before. So let's move on to, this is just basically what I was saying about a principle. But what's more interesting and sort of important for this context are roles and access controls. So there's two types of roles. There's dynamic roles, which these are built-in roles in LoopBack that correspond to JavaScript functions. And when any of these functions resolve true, so when any of these functions return true, then the requester, the access token provided by the request, is considered to match one of these roles. So you can use the same APIs that we use internally to define these roles, to define your own dynamic roles, which means you can have roles that apply only when the result of a function returns true. So that's how we provide these dynamic roles. And I think we have an example of one of these. Okay, so this is an example of specifying an access control for a review model using the command line interface. This should actually say API-C. So we start with a model, in this case review, and then we tell LoopBack which methods or properties we want this access control to apply to. So we could tell it read, which would apply this access control to any operation that reads data, write, or execute. There's several other access types, or what those are called. And then we specify the role, which is either a dynamic role, so the list in the previous slide, or a static role, which is where, so the difference between a dynamic role is it's a JavaScript function that's executed that resolves a role, or a static role is a role that's defined within, say, a database or within your code that is matched by a key on, for example, the review model. And then, so once we specified all that information, we select whether we want to provide, or we want to apply an allow or deny to the access control. So if these conditions are met, do we want to allow this access, or do we want to deny it? And so what I was saying before about the controlling the business logic-based access control. That's really what this is useful for. So sometimes you have, let's say, an owner of the review. Let's see. So this example doesn't use that, but let's say only owners of the review should be able to modify them. Then we can use this in the previous slide, this owner dynamic role, which looks at the object and looks at the owner property, and it looks at the access token and the principal and determines the principal ID, like so the user ID. And if those are equal, then it returns true, and so it's considered an owner, which allows us to declare things like only owners should be able to modify this data, which is something that isn't something you can really do in a gateway. Does that answer some of those questions? Are there any questions about ACLs? Because we get quite a few questions. Switch to the chat.
Yeah, taking a look at the chat, I think we're okay. Any questions on the call? Star one to unmute.
Nope.
No. Okay. All right. Yeah, I don't have any other questions other than the fact that thank you for presenting. Please do share these slides with me, and also if you could share that one slide that you show. I think you had to flip over to another presentation to kind of show the architect, micro gateway architecture.
Yeah, I'll add that in here, and I'll send these out. I'll send them to you, Mike.
Perfect, thanks. Oh, one question did just pop up. It says, is there a way to tie in the ACL to an LDAP source for the gateway? I assume micro gateway.
It's not natively. Really, like I was saying before, anything is possible with if you're willing to implement some of the hooks that we allow you to implement. So you can do those in the micro gateway. You can do those in your loopback application. So technically the answer is yes, but it's not like a built-in feature where you specify the LDAP configuration and then it just does it for you. You have to write a little bit of JavaScript to do that.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Okay. All right. If there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and close. Thank you very much, Richie, for the presentation. For the folks in the call, you should see a reschedule in your inboxes now for the CLI session that was supposed to follow this one that has been moved. So please do check your inbox. And also for tomorrow's calls, you'll be getting updated invites to get a different conference line, different remote live meeting session. So just be sure you make sure that's updated on your side because John Roberts will be hosting using his live meeting sessions because I unfortunately am booked tomorrow. So just a FYI there. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great rest of the day, and then we have several sessions tomorrow that you can attend. So thanks again, and have a good day.
Thanks, Mike.